All right, let's jump right into a fascinating idea. What happens when the science of the brain meets Christian faith? We're going to explore the bridge that's actually being built between these two very different worlds. Have you ever asked yourself this question? What's really going on in there, in that complex web of neurons, when you connect with something you consider divine? It's a really personal, kind of mysterious question, and it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today.
You know, historically, these two worlds, science and faith, have often seemed like they're on opposite sides. You've got biology over here and theology way over there. So let's break down why that is.
So science talks to us about the brain, biology, physical matter. Faith, on the other hand, uses a totally different vocabulary. We're talking soul, grace, spirit. For a long time, it felt like they were speaking completely different languages, describing separate realities. But this is where the core idea really comes into play. The proposal here isn't to see a wall between them, but an opportunity. What if, instead of conflict, we actually look for a connection? What if we build a bridge?
Okay, so that bridge actually has a name: neurotheology. Let's really dive into this concept and see what it's all about and how it's proposing to connect these two seemingly distant worlds.
All right, so the crucial point is this. Christian neurotheology isn't just about applying science to religion. Its goal is to understand the two-way street between the brain and faith. But, and this is absolutely key, it's always anchored in theology and church doctrine. The whole point isn't to replace faith, but to have a dialogue with it.
Okay, so let's move from theory to practice. What does this bridge look like in action? What can modern science tell us about the real, measurable impact of faith on our brains?
Well, researchers like Andrew Newberg have used brain imaging to look at people's brains during deep prayer or meditation, and the findings are pretty amazing. They've seen that prayer actually activates the prefrontal cortex, that's the part tied to our will and planning. It also changes areas related to attention and even regulates our emotional centers. I mean, spiritual practice literally leaves a neurological footprint.
And this is a brilliant illustration of the other side of that bridge. This whole idea of renewing the mind, that's not some modern concept. St. Paul wrote about it almost 2,000 years ago. What's so fascinating is that neuroscience today seems to be giving us a window, a way to actually observe what that transformation, the one faith talks about, might look like on a biological level. But, of course, a new field like this isn't without its pitfalls. It's really important that we tackle a major warning here, and that's the risk of reductionism. The key word here is reductionism. It's that huge temptation to oversimplify everything and just say, oh, so a spiritual experience is nothing more than an electrical impulse in the parietal lobe, or faith is just a bunch of chemical reactions. You see the problem. And this is a line we have to be super clear about. Neuroscience can describe the map, but it can't describe the territory itself. It can show us how faith impacts our biology, but it can't explain the who or the why behind that faith. In other words, it describes the effect, not the transcendent cause.
So, if we manage to avoid that trap of reductionism, where does this bridge we've been exploring actually take us? Well, it leads us to a much more complete, a much more unified vision of what it means to be human.
The idea here is an integral spirituality, one where there's no separation. We're not just a brain in a jar, and we're not a spirit trapped in a machine. We're a single, unified whole. Our physical actions, our thought patterns, our spiritual life, they're all deeply interconnected. What we do with our bodies affects our mind and our spirit, and it absolutely goes the other way too.
And from the Christian faith perspective, which is the framework for this whole analysis, this integrated view finds its ultimate meaning in this famous quote from the Second Vatican Council. The proposal is that a full understanding of this unity of body, mind, and spirit is really illuminated through a theological lens.
And so, this whole journey leaves us with one final question, one that goes beyond just science or just theology on their own. If neuroscience and faith can come together to show us that we are this inseparable whole, then what does it truly mean to be fully human? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.